You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European-style butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to Pizza Quest. Yeah, we're on a different kind of quest today. Not for the perfect pizza, but for the perfect musical entertainer. The top of Mount Rushmore, the king of the hill, or as he's better known, the chairman of the board. Our guest today is my longtime friend and musical mentor, Peter Scott Ruben. If you're from Philadelphia, you may already know him as the leader of the Peter Scott Ruben Orchestra. Hell, he may have played at your wedding or your kid's bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, but I know him as the best rock guitar player I've ever known. A guy who has played as Eric Clapton and Jimmi Hendrix in tribute bands and has jammed with some of the best guitar players in the world, even back in the basement of our college dorm in Boston over 50 years ago. But now he's performing all over the place in a one-man tribute show of Frank Sinatra and Bobby Darin songs, and he's totally killing it. Hey, Peter, welcome to Pizza Quest. And yes, we will talk pizza later on, but for now, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of the guy you consider to be the top of the hill. Why Frank Sinatra? How did that happen? And let's put together a top 10 list of the performers you'd consider to be the best of the best. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, always good to see you.
Over 50 years, yeah, jamming the basement of Miles Standish Hall many times.
Yeah, I used to have to dig you out of the basement of Miles Standish Hall in Boston and ask you if you'd done your homework that day.
The answer was a resounding no.
No, right? Exactly. So Peter, look, you were a serious rock band guy. Then later on, you got into, talk a little bit about your journey. That because you kind of transitioned into making a living as an orchestra leader, as a band leader, and now somehow years later, it's come full circle. We're into the standards, into Frank Sinatra, Bobby Darin. How did you make that transition from, the rock era into what you're doing today?
Oh, geez. We don't have enough time.
Well, you covered a lot of ground. But
growing up, of course, rock and roll was always the thing. You and I, we grew up, we were born in the perfect year.
Right.
We're old enough to remember Elvis. We were 13 when the Beatles hit, and the greatest music ever. If you want to talk about that, I will say it to the day I die, that the 1960s is the greatest era for music, without question. What happened was I grew up in a musical family. My dad, Harold, was a band leader, and he also gave piano lessons. And my brother, Nick, was a piano player and was also taking piano lessons. And then he was teaching himself. So the house was always resonating with these songs because that's what was being taught in those days, was popular music. It was standards. So without even realizing it, they were seeping into my subconscious.
It wasn't like the music you were preferring at the time. It's just that it was there all the time.
It was there. And my father and later my brother, but especially my dad, it was an incredible piano player. So he made the songs come alive through how good he was as a piano player.
And your dad was also like probably the most well-known orchestra leader in Philadelphia. I mean, almost every wedding or bar mitzvah or any kind of special celebration, your dad's orchestra would be one of the top
He
two.
was one of the top.
Playing. Yeah,
He was one of the, yes. As a matter of fact, one of the other top orchestra leaders, Bobby Roberts, lived in the same building as
No
we
kidding.
did, the Trianon Apartments.
That's it. That was when we were kids and people were getting bar mitzvah. The question would always be, "Who do you got? Harold Ruben or Bobby Roberts?"
Right. Or Jay Jerome or Jackie Gold.
There were a couple others, but yeah, there was the pantheon. So
And
anyway, you grew up in that, but you had a band in high school. You fronted a rock band. Was it a cover band?
Rock and roll cover band, doing whatever we could do with 2 guitars, bass and drum. Our original name, this was my mother's idea, from the Monkees, Monkees. We were the Creatures, Creetures.
The Creatures.
Then we became the Vandals. And then in 12th grade, we were the Warlocks. And our business card said the wicked sound of the Warlocks.
Oh, wow.
Then we got nervous about the motorcycle gang, like they would even care about us.
Right.
And for our very last gig in the summer of 1968, for one gig, we became Mona Lisa's Mustache.
No kidding. No, I don't even remember that one.
Yes, for one gig. And then we parted ways.
It sounds like Mamma Mia. For one gig and one gig only.
One gig.
Mona Lisa and the Mustache. So anyway, you kind of started getting deep into, I mean, the music of that time that we were going crazy over was Eric Clapton, Cream. There was Jimmi Hendrix. There was, these were the guitar gods of that era were our gods.
Yes. And there was no template. There was nobody teaching that because it was being invented on a day-by-day basis.
Right.
Jeff Beck, Hendrix, Clapton, a couple of Jimmy Page a little later with Zeppelin in 69. They were creating it. We were playing catch-up. And what I discovered was that coming from Philadelphia to Boston, Philadelphia had nowhere near the music scene that Boston did.
Right.
When I got to BU and would just sling my guitar on my back and walk around the city, there were endless jams all night long. And
I think guys that were like back then, they were unknown, but later became guitar players for bands like Aerosmith.
Well, the Aerosmith house on Commonwealth Avenue was 2 blocks from our dorm. I must have jammed in that house 100 times.
But they weren't yet known as the Aerosmith that we know today.
Well, you're talking 1969, 1970. Yep. They were just kids like us, but they were good.
Yeah.
They were good. And I picked their brains and I watched them for an entire semester. I played rhythm guitar so that I could be in the jams and watch them play lead. And then I'd go back to the dorm and try to figure out what they did. And I did that for 6 straight months. And then actually
no wonder you flunked out of school.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I never flunked out. I dropped out.
You dropped out. Yes.
I dropped out. I dropped out before midterms. If you dropped out before midterms, after midterms, yes, you were failing.
Yeah.
Before midterms, you just dropped out.
Yeah, you took the proactive approach.
Absolutely.
I quit before you can fire me.
I couldn't get you to take all my finals, just one.
I did take one of your finals, didn't I?
But economics. Yeah. You got me a B and I paid you $50.
Money well spent.
Absolutely.
So then what happened? You went on and then eventually moved back to Philadelphia.
Came back to Philly. I went to Penn State for a short time. The idea was to go to school there, get in a band there. Was living with my girlfriend. Couldn't get the band together. Penn State was not accepting any more transfers, so I came home. I was back at the Trianon Apartments with my folks, and I walked to St. Joe's Night School. It was the closest place. I walked there because I wanted to get back into school because the draft was still on and my number was 38.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So your hand was forced. Yeah. And St. Joseph's College was within walking distance of your houses. Yes. People may not know who are watching, but I know because I was the college that we all knew about. Back then it was a small college. Now it's huge. It's now over the entire, city line corridor.
Sure. Now it's a university. Back then it was the college, and I was in night school, so that was really an afterthought.
But an act of desperation.
But what happened was, as soon as I got back, I was jamming with a friend of mine's younger brother and a drummer in their living room. And I was fresh off coming from Boston and Penn State, and my playing was hot, and I knew all the Cream songs. And my friend's older brother called his buddy across the street. I don't know if I should do names or not names, for the people from the neighborhood.
It's up to you, if you feel like they can handle it.
I think they could handle it, sure. I was jamming with Dave Myers, whose older brother was Andy, who hired me at Penn State. He called me the Phantom Guitarist because I would show up every couple of months at Penn State and then disappear. And he never knew who I was. And he walks into his house and he goes, "It's you, the Phantom guitar player." And we're jamming in the living room. And he goes upstairs and calls across the street to his friend Jay Berkowitz. And he says, "You got to come over. I've got Eric Clapton in my living room." And Jay comes over and hears me play. And his band is going through changes. Do you want to join a band? I mean, I'm not home a week. And I get to join a band. Guys from Drexel, they were a couple years older. The band was really good. And I was thrilled. So before I know it, I'm back in school full time and playing in a band full time and having a great time. And I could play. By then I could play. And what would happen is back in those days, for bands like my father's and all of those society orchestras, even the Jewish band leaders, they couldn't play rock and roll.
Right.
So for the big debutante parties and the hospital galas, there were always two groups, one at one end and one at the other, and they would take 20 minutes on, half an hour on, half an hour on. And the band would play, the orchestra would play, and then the rock band would play. And so we did that several times. And then I just started showing up on my father's gigs as the rock guitar player.
So basically,
just play the rock and roll.
You had a fit. He needed somebody who could do what you were doing because they were getting left behind, so to speak, as the musical scene changed.
In the year, needed late 60s, early 70s, needed to bring contemporary rock and roll into their repertoire. And what happened was my father's guys were great players. He had terrific vocalists. And the songs started to seep into my head.
There you go. Yeah.
Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, the Gershwins. I'd sit next to my dad. I don't know how he led the band because I asked him questions for 4 hours. Who wrote that? Who sang that? Who did this? What key is this in? What was that chord?
But this must have been great for your dad to have you, his son, joining his orchestra to be part of the legacy.
I didn't appreciate it at the time. I do now. Now I can see how much he must have adored that. So I started to really appreciate the songs, and then listening to probably Sunday with Sinatra, Friday with Frank, with Sid Mark.
That was the radio, the big radio.
Every week, week after week after week after week, and hearing Sinatra singing these songs, I went crazy. I went crazy like I did for the Beatles. I went crazy like the first time we heard "You Really Got Me."
Yeah.
What was that? It was that kind of a moment. It was I never recovered.
But it was tricky for people, for us in our peer culture, to admit that we liked these standards when everybody else was listening to Bob Dylan and the rock stuff and the blues and all that. And then here we are, a few of us who and I was secretly sort of a big fan of a couple. Like my big secret crush was Barbra Streisand, but I couldn't tell anybody. It wasn't until years later that I could admit to people like you because then I found out, hey, you had a similar kind of thing going.
I converted everyone. Anyone in my sphere, anyone, I got them into Sinatra. Because once somebody put their rock and roll ears aside and could really listen to him, what he was able to do, the quality of his voice, his I forgot to turn my phone off like an idiot.
That happens to us all the time on this show.
I remembered 20 minutes before, 5 minutes before, and then I forgot. That what Frank was able to do with a song was so remarkable.
Well, let's talk about that, because that is something that people don't realize, that he was unique. He was he rose to the top of, and there were a lot of great performers back then. And we're going to talk about our top 10 list or top 20 list of performers. But he was peerless, as you said. What made him peerless? What was it that differentiated him and made the difference between a good performer and a great performer?
It's hard to quantify magic.
Yeah.
There's certain things in life that just go beyond X's and O's and statistics. There is magic that exists. And Sinatra had it probably more than anyone. He had charisma.
Yeah.
I would see him at the Spectrum, 18,000 people. 18,000 people. When Frank wanted it quiet, he didn't say a word. He just stood on the stage and 18,000 people shut up. And all you could hear was the hum of the ventilation system. He had charisma. The only person in our lifetime that compares to Frank's charisma was JFK.
Wow.
He had that kind of, when you saw him on TV, when he was on, your eyes couldn't be anywhere else.
It's interesting because by the time that we were seeing him in places like the Spectrum, I mean, he didn't have his voice, and when he was a young man, a crooner, he had a beautiful voice. I mean, I understood why women would go, orgasmic on him,
and they never stopped, because
even when he lost his voice,
it declined, but he never lost it. There are live recordings from the mid to mid 90s that still hold up. He was raspy. Yes, you can't smoke that many cigarettes and drink that much Jack Daniels and not affect your vocal cords.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate, but his total package was more than just the voice. But even in the days when the voice was there, the magic was his ability to translate notes and words into an emotional experience. People said for decades they felt that Frank was singing just to them. And that's something that's, there's a lot of good singers, and you haven't heard that much said about really anybody else except Frank, that he was singing. I felt like Frank was singing just to me.
Let's break that down a little bit. How does somebody do that? I mean, what were if you broke it down sort of objectively into criteria, what are some of the things that happen in a package that's so charismatic?
Well, Frank was, as all good creative artists are, very emotional, a deeply feeling man, and he was able to translate that feeling through his voice so that other people would get it. There's a difference between feeling a song and singing a song, and there's a difference between being able to get that across, and that's the talent. And there's no word for what that talent is. It's just he had it, and he had it in spades, more than anyone, longer than anyone.
It's not something that actually can be taught. It's something you either have or you don't have, but then it can be cultivated and honed and crafted.
Can't be taught.
Yeah.
That's why all the impressionists, all the singers, everybody who tries to do Frank, nobody has ever successfully impersonated Frank Sinatra. It's not possible.
Well, you do a show, a tribute show, in which you sing a lot of his songs. In fact, you even, if I'm not mistaken, you even got a hold of the original charts, the Nelson Riddle charts, the arrangements that he did, and you performed them pretty close to, to the way they were written. What did you try to do in trying to channel, that Frank Sinatra charisma?
I channel whatever modicum of God-given talent I have vocally. My family were players. I broke the mold. The Beatles happened. What did they do? They played guitar and they sang. So we started to sing badly for a long time. So I studied with some of the best voice teachers in Philadelphia because there are two things in my life that I had to do. Besides having kids, getting married and having kids, that I had to do. Musically, the two things that I had to do, I had to be able to play like Clapton from Cream. I had to be able to sing the Sinatra songs well enough to do them justice, because nobody's ever been as good as me. As hard as it was to learn to play guitar like Eric, and it was hard. You're talking bleeding fingers over years.
You're probably paying the price for that today, right?
Learning to sing the standards was way harder.
Really?
It's the most difficult music to sing. It sounds easy.
Yeah.
The greats make it look easy.
They make it look easy. Yeah.
Michael Jordan made it look easy. Sinatra made it that nobody's ever been able to do what he does. It wasn't easy. It's the hardest music to sing in the world.
I started thinking about all the contemporaries during his heyday, from Bing Crosby, who was also, I consider, one of the greatest, but then there were others, then there were the so-called, the wannabes or the second tier guys, the Julius LaRosas and Vic Damones and all these guys who were really good. They were all very good, but none of them did what he did.
No. There's just what amazes me about people who have this kind of impact. What really blows me away isn't so much that they have the talent. It's that they're actually able to express that talent fully and completely. And we all have talent. To be able to mine that talent successfully, to get it out into the world, to me, that's the magic. That's the miracle.
Yeah, and to be able to connect with the audience, whether it's each person thinking, oh, he's singing to me. My mom went to his Frank Sinatra concert when she was a teenager, and I'm sure she had that experience. She was probably one of the kids throwing her, underwear up on the stage, but people had that experience. So they felt connected. And when I was putting together my own list of performers that I can think of from my lifetime, that I considered the top of the best of the best, that was the thing that I kept looking for, is who are the people that I felt I could connect with or connected with me in a way that was deep and meaningful, that made my spine shiver, so to speak. And I mean, he's not the only one that could do that, but there were many that could, but he did it in, as you said, sort of he was the best and the brightest of them.
Frank was a genius on more levels than anyone I ever know in history, because not only was he the best male singer ever, and I say male singer because there's a female singer that I think was.
We'll get to her. We'll get to her in a little bit.
We'll get to her later.
Yeah. Because I want people to listen, hang in there, because we're going to go through, our top list, and we're going to create a Mount Rushmore of maybe the top 4 of all time. So
Frank's genius came out in not only his ability to pick songs, but his ability. Songwriters wrote for him. They wrote their songs hoping that he would sing them. He drove them to a higher level. The record albums in the 50s, mono, hold up today at least as well as they did then. Mono primitive recordings were the best recordings of that music ever made. He brought it out in the engineers. He brought it out in his arrangers. Billy May, Nelson Riddle, Don Costa. Everyone rose to their highest level working with Frank Sinatra. That there's a genius there. He also did something in 1960 that had never been done. He started his own record label. Record companies, I turned this off. I can't believe it's not off. Hold on.
Was it your phone?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Mine does it too.
In 1960, he started his own record label. Record labels were part of big companies.
Mm-hmm. Wait, was it? Let me see if I can recall. Was it record label? Was it Reprise?
It was Reprise.
It was Reprise.
Before that, Columbia
Yeah.
Columbia Pictures,
They own.
RCA.
Yeah.
They're all EMI in Britain. They were subsidiaries of gigantic corporations. Sinatra, I want my own record label. Not that he had a problem with Capitol Records. He loved Capitol. He was making 3, 4, 5 albums a year, making them a fortune. He could do whatever he wanted to do. He just wanted the control of his own record label. So he fought. And what I loved as a kid, when we were kids, the two artists that were also on Reprise were Joni Mitchell and Jimmi Hendrix.
Interesting. I didn't know that Jimmi Hendrix and
oh yeah,
and I totally forgot that Joni Mitchell's on my top list as we'll get to.
So Frank's genius. He was a business genius. He across the board. Not only that, his talent extended far beyond his voice. He never took an acting lesson. Is there a better performance than the Manchurian Candidate?
Maybe From Here to Eternity.
From Here to Eternity. Fabulous.
Yeah.
He was a great dancer. Never took a dance lesson. He hung with Gene Kelly in several movies.
That's right.
He was a natural across the board. I don't know anyone. The only two people that come close to that kind of talent are Sammy Davis Jr. and Bobby Darin.
Well, I want to talk to them because they're on my list.
Yeah,
and I want to find and I know that in your show, and you perform it. I know that you performed it for my mom and where she's living in her assisted living center, and it's all built around the Bobby Darin songs and the Frank Sinatra songs. So why Bobby Darin? Why did you put him into that category?
I knew Bobby from Mac the Knife, Beyond the Sea, Artificial Flowers, and Clementine. And of course, his rock and roll, his Splish Splash and Dream Lover, both of which he wrote.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he wrote them both.
Yeah.
Sid Mark used to do Sunday with Sinatra from 9 to 2. And then from 2 to 3, he had a show called The Music Machine, where he would play his favorites. He had nobody, he could play whatever he wanted. He played Ella Fitzgerald, he played Vic Damone, he played Jack Jones, he played Sarah Vaughan, none of which we ever heard because in the 60s, everything was rock and roll.
Right.
And a song comes on. I knew Sid very early on. I would call him when he was back at WWDB, when they were doing the news. I would call him when they were, and talk to him, from years and years and years. When the news was on, he was on a break. I would talk to him for 5 minutes. And he'd say, Peter, I got to go. The news is over.
Yeah, right.
There was a song that he played, and I waited for the break, and I called him, and I said, who was that? It was Bobby Darin singing a song called As Long As I'm Singing. It's 1 minute and 31 seconds. It's the shortest song that I know. And it blew me away. And Sid said, Bobby Darin. I said, where can I find it? He said, well, there's a bootleg called Rarin' Darin.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look it up. I mean, this is before the internet. I don't know how I found it. That was my re-intro into Bobby Darin, because I discovered that throughout the 60s, he made many, many, many albums, both for Atlantic Records and Capitol Records, of all standards that no one heard because they weren't being played. And they were all fantastic. And I have every single one of them. And I maintain that had he lived, he died at 37 in 1973.
Yeah, tragically cut short. Yeah.
Had he lived, he would have challenged Frank for that throne. That's how good Bobby Darin was.
Yeah, and similar sort of parallel, even though it's a much shorter arc, but he was an actor. He had the same natural gifts, the ability to, without any real acting training, go in and steal a movie, with a few scenes. And there's something about him when he performed. I saw him perform live at the Latin Casino when I was a kid, and we didn't know that he was going to be. And then he eventually had a TV series, and then all of a sudden he was dead. What happened? How did he die?
He had rheumatic fever as a child. Wasn't supposed to live past 15. So his life was literally a race against time.
Wow.
And When Elvis went into the Army in 58, he had Splish Splash and Dream Lover, all his people. Hey, you're the new king of rock and roll. Congratulations. He didn't say these words, but in essence, he said, I don't want Elvis. I want Frank.
Wow.
He knew he didn't have time to waste.
Yeah.
So against everyone's advice, the record label, his lawyers, his managers, his agents, he went into the studio and recorded an album of standards. They thought he was nuts. You're a rock and roll star. What the hell are you doing? The song that they picked as the single was Mac the Knife. Which
became a huge hit. Yeah.
His biggest record, his only #1 record, and is still today worldwide one of the most popular songs ever. So he was right. And the most remarkable thing, and it's interesting because talking about statistics, my most remarkable classic rock statistic, people talk about Sgt. Pepper in 67. John and Ringo were 27. Paul was 25. George was 24. Incredibly young to have achieved that masterpiece.
Yeah.
This statistic that when Cream ended, Clapton was 23.
Yeah.
When it ended,
they were kids.
23. When Bobby Darin recorded Mac the Knife, he was 23. And the prevailing wisdom at the time for decades was that you had to live a lifetime's worth of years in order to have the experience to be able to authentically sing those songs. Bobby Darin blew that out of the water with one song.
How do your audiences respond these days when I know they all know, everyone knows Frank. Do they respond in the same way to the Bobby Darin songs?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So for those people who are like of a younger generation, if you're contemporaries with us, you know Bobby Darin, you know all the names we're throwing out here. But for those who are younger and have missed all of that, go back, hit Spotify, do whatever you need to do. Bring up on your Pandora, bring up the Bobby Darin playlist, and you'll recognize a number of his songs. And if you get a chance to see any YouTubes of him performing, he was just, like you said, he was just a naturally charismatic performer. When he had his TV series, I don't know if it lasted 1 year or 2 years, but it was a great show. And
it started as a summer replacement for maybe the Sonny and Cher show or the Smothers Brothers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
he could do everything. He did impressions. He danced and he played a million instruments. And
nightclub show was like that. It was a great show. In fact, some of the people that we're going to talk about now, because I want to move in before we run out of time, I want to talk about some of the other people that make the cut, that are people that register in our lives as folks that touched us deeply, that might be top tenors.
Before we do that, I want to finish answering the question you asked me before, is how do I get that across when I'm singing these songs? And I said, I take my whatever God-given talent I have. What I do is I share the love that I have of these songs. I don't sing them. I never sing them rote. I never sing them like, I got to sing this one again. Maybe My Way. That one, Frank got tired of it too. But I love these songs. And the fact that I have the opportunity to perform them in front of people, I am so grateful that they get the love. They get my commitment. They get how much I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
the love is passing through. Because you're loving what you're doing and you're loving those songs. Yeah.
I literally feel like I'm channeling Frank, Dean, Sammy, Bobby. I feel like I'm actually channeling them when I'm singing these songs.
Well, that's what it takes. You have to, and we talk about the same properties, the qualities, when we talk about whether it's a pizza world or craft in general, that, what is the difference between just good, everyday pizza and the great pizza, the stuff that actually, becomes memorable in your life and made a difference in your life. Musical artists, of course, are even more prominent in our lives, that have more impact than even our favorite pizzerias. Let's talk about let's work our way down. I want to build up to kind of a Mount Rushmore. We know who's sitting at the top of Mount Rushmore,
Right.
and you mentioned a couple other people that we may get to, but who are some other people that are on, let's say, a top 10 list for you that might not be the top 4?
Well, if you're talking this kind of music, because
We're talking about not guitar players, not just entertainers, but performers, vocalist performers.
well, are we talking Robert Plant and Steve Miller? Are we talking those kinds of guys? Or are we keeping it in the
Well, if they played, let's say if they played with a band and they were just the frontman of a band, and that's one thing. If they later broke, like a Rod Stewart broke from his bands and became his own thing, then I think we could put him on there, because Frank did the same thing. He was a band singer.
There
He
you
broke
go.
from the band. Yeah. So let's draw the line there. Let's come get you back another show in the future, and we'll talk about bands and performers in that category. Let's talk about the guys who we might see them in a nightclub or in a one-man show, or that kind of thing.
Well, to go back, you mentioned Bing.
Yeah.
Not my favorite, because the swing hadn't really happened yet. So to me, he's a little corny, but clearly a groundbreaking entertainer, and really the only true vocalist before Frank.
That's right.
They were very good friends, and Bing was Frank's idol. Oh, as an aside, they filmed 2 movies together. And when I do my show, I ask the question, does anybody know? A lot of people get the first one.
High Society.
High Society, 1956, which was Cole Porter's last score.
Mm.
And no one has ever gotten the second one.
Really? I'm trying to think if I know it.
Let the listeners, viewers,
All right.
get on it for a few
Let's
minutes.
come back to that. Yeah, we'll
come
think about this one, guys. We'll come back to that. By the way, folks, we're going to start throwing some names out there, and if you want to chime in, I don't do social media, I don't do Facebook, I don't have chats, but what I do have is an email address. Write to me at peter@pizzaquest.com and chime in. Tell us who you think should be on this list, and we'll get a conversation going. If we get enough action with conversations, we might be able to put a whole show together where we get a group. We'll do some kind of a group conversation chat with with Peter at the helm. So think about that. But and we'll come back to the other movie that Frank and Bing did together, because I'm hoping it'll pop into my head, because I think I saw it and I'm trying to remember what it was now.
No one has ever gotten the answer. In 2 states, in Pennsylvania and Florida, no one's ever gotten it.
Okay, well, there's our challenge. But okay, so Bing Crosby, I didn't have him in my top 10, because as much as I loved him, and when I watched the holiday movies and hear him sing, or whenever I hear him sing, I realize this guy wasn't just there was something special about him, and until Frank came along, he was the pyramid. Yeah,
That's right.
and then and so to be able to eclipse that, because for like 10 years in a row, he was the #1 box office star of Hollywood.
He used to say about Sinatra, Sinatra is a singer who comes along once in a lifetime. Why did it have to be in my lifetime?
There you go. It's great. That's a great line. But it's great that he recognized that. Yeah.
After Frank, you've got Bobby Darin.
Okay.
After Bobby, I would have to say Jack Jones.
Oh, well, that's one that not that many people, remember him. I saw him perform, but he wasn't ever at that level. He never achieved that level of.
He's most famous for singing the theme to The Love Boat. And that was a real throwaway tune. Jack Jones was world class, and his father, Alan Jones, was the straight man in all the Marx Brothers movies.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I knew that there was an Alan Jones actor, but I didn't know what he was known for. Let me throw a couple, and I want to work from the bottom of my list up a little bit. Here's a couple that I'm wondering where they rank for you. Number 1, Judy Garland.
Right there. Top
Special.
top three female artists of all time.
Okay, let's stay in the female category. Top 3. I'm thinking. All right, I have about 4 or 5 names on my list here. I'm going to try to see if I can guess what your top 3 are. I'm going to think maybe Ella Fitzgerald would be one.
Number 1, greatest singer that ever lived, male or female. The only entertainer that Frank said he had to up his game in order to sing with her. She's number 1.
And I did, amazingly, when I was 10 years old, I got to see her perform live at the Latin Casino. I had no idea who she was. My parents did, and I went there and I went, "Whoa, who is this?" But I only really learned to appreciate her much later in life, when I started to listen to her voice on, on the radio when I was, just later, after I got past through the rock and roll era, and then I started listening to her again, and I went, oh my God, what a voice. I don't think I've ever heard as pure a voice in the musical world.
I'll give you a fast story about Ella. Talking about how talent comes through. She's over in Berlin, I think it's Berlin, with her trio, piano, bass, and drum. It was recorded live, and she wanted to sing Mac the Knife. And she said, before she started the song, I hope I remember the words. Halfway through the song, she didn't remember the words. So Ella Fitzgerald improvises the whole second half of Mac the Knife and goes into a high key, as high a key as is humanly possible, and hits every note. And it's one of the most remarkable performances ever committed to record.
Is it on record? Is it on YouTube?
It is on record. Yeah, her Mac the Knife is famous, and she completely forgot the words. But she was so great, her talent was so immense, that she pulled it off better than if she had remembered the words. That's Ellen. She was the queen.
Well, there you go. And so she's somebody again who I'm putting them on my list if I feel like in some way they have emotionally touched me to where I get emotional just hearing them. So she's one. Somebody more recent, of a more recent vintage. I'm wondering how she would rate on yours would be Whitney Houston.
Whitney Houston.
Same thing, huh? Yeah.
May
had that special something.
Maybe the greatest God-given voice ever. That's how good Whitney was. Maybe the greatest instrument, God-given instrument ever. And what she did with it is a tragedy.
Yeah.
How she figured it away and her life.
Yeah.
An absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
But those are my three.
How about Barbra Streisand? Would she rate on your list?
Streisand may be in competition with Whitney for the greatest God-given female voice of all time. My only knock against Streisand is her lifelong choice of material. She's a show singer and a ballad singer.
Yeah.
And for years, Barbara, put your toe into the swing water. Put your toe into Ella's. Let's swing a little bit. Come on. I never did it.
Well, in my experience of her was that she transcended her material. There was something so good about her that she could take ordinary songs and make them transcendent just by the way she performed them.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. She and still is. It goes to show you
that's right.
If you don't smoke and don't drink, the voice maintains. Tony Bennett's last performance was on his 95th birthday.
That's right. Yeah.
He's on my list too. He's right under Frank, Bobby, Sammy, Tony. He's right.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Sammy Davis Jr., which a lot of people don't realize how phenomenal he was. I mean, people who've seen him realize it, but there was a guy talk about natural gift. And there's something about him. There was a soulfulness about him that touched you that no matter what he was performing, whether he was singing, dancing, acting, there was something that the pain that came through him that
Sammy he never forgot where he came from.
Hmm.
He never forgot where he came from. And if it weren't for Frank Sinatra, he never would have gone anywhere.
You're right. Okay.
Besides integrating Las Vegas, Frank had that kind of power. He went to the heads of the casinos and said, not only are the entertainers going to stay here, they're going to come in the front door. And they're going to be able to gamble in the casino, or I'm not singing here anymore. And they all caved. And Sinatra is single-handedly responsible for integrating Las Vegas.
Interesting. It's something nobody thinks about much.
Right.
All right, I'm going to throw a couple of names out because we're coming to the end, and I want to kind of get as many names out here as we can before
just getting warmed up.
I know. Well, we got to do this again. All right, here's a new one. This is one I just thought of it this morning when I was after I made my list, and I thought, wait a minute, I forgot somebody maybe because she's still too new, but
don't seem like
Lady Gaga. I think has the potential to make this list. She's not in my top 10 right now, but I think that's because she's so recent. But there's something about her. There's a quality about her that I think be enduring. When I talk about these, I'm thinking of the people who pass the test of time, who have enduringness, and I think she could make that.
Well, the two albums that she made with Tony Bennett are they're both great, and that she was able to embrace this style of music and do it authentically is definitely a feather in her cap. She loved Tony, Tony loved her, and those two albums, they both work. And she was with Tony on his last performance.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, at Carnegie Hall. She was there.
Wow. Yeah. Well, so she'll be around for a little while longer. And now here's another one that I wonder how you feel about her. I think there's there's divided opinion about whether she should be on the all-time greats, but it's Celine Dion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, not a swing singer.
No,
but
she's got the big ballad voice. Yeah.
Absolutely. She's in the Streisand mold.
Oh,
that kind of a voice and that kind of an impact. I don't want you to leave out. She can't sing anymore because she's not well, but she crossed over magnificently to this kind of music. She made 3 albums with Nelson Riddle, is Linda Ronstadt.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Perfect.
I hadn't even thought of her. Yeah.
Perfect voice. Perfect. Yeah. Anything she wanted to do, she did as well as anybody.
Okay, let's quickly get to. I'm glad you put her on because I hadn't even thought of her. But let's throw out anything left on your list, and then we'll come back and we'll before we sign off, we'll talk about our Mount Rushmore.
Vic Damone has to be on there for men.
Yeah,
and for the women, Edie Gourmet.
Edie Gourmet.
Edie Gourmet's version of "If He Walked Into My Life Today" from Mame may be the singular best female performance of all time.
Really?
Yes.
No, I've got to go listen to that. I saw Edie Gourmet when I was a kid, but I didn't realize how great she was. She was bigger than her husband. Her husband, they were a team, Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, and they always said she carried him, but he was good too.
He had a great career in rock and roll.
Yeah.
Pretty Blue Eyes. That when we were kids, he had a bunch of top 40 hits. Steve, he was as good as Steve Lawrence was as good as it gets. He needs to be on the top 10.
I'm going to throw one out there that sort of doesn't fit and because he's not a big voice singer, he wasn't a big entertainer, but there's something about the quality of his voice and his songs that I think make him a top tenor, and that's James Taylor.
James Taylor. Well, I remember seeing James Taylor at the Main Point.
We went together to see him.
Yes. And he had recorded the album for the Beatles for Apple Records.
Yeah.
He hadn't recorded Sweet Baby James yet.
Mm.
But it hadn't been out yet. But I think he had recorded it. So from my 2 cents, that was the high point. Sweet Baby James was the high point. I don't think he ever came close to duplicating Sweet Baby James.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
It was just
perfect in its time. Yeah. And yet 50 years later, he's still selling out, the big halls.
Yeah.
So that tells you something. Okay. One more woman to put on the list, Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton.
I know, a unique kind of outlier in terms of the kind of people we're talking about here, but you talk about charisma, talk about
country. I don't really have anybody to compare her to because that's not my, I like what's going on in country now much more than I did when we were kids.
Okay.
They say if you want to hear great rock and roll, you got to listen to contemporary country. That's the only place great rock and roll is being played.
Interesting. Which brings up another name that we need to at least consider, and that's Beyonce. Have you gotten into her at all?
Very talented lady.
Yeah.
Very.
I mean, and in terms of being a performer, I don't know that she's got the greatest voice or this or that, but as a performer, she's electric.
Her whole package.
Yeah.
And she's not tough to look at.
Yeah, but there's an electricity factor in her that is really rare, and like you say, it's God-given. It's not something you can teach.
There's a guy we're leaving out, a guy with 2 first names from New York City, Billy Joel.
Billy Joel. I have him on my list. I was going to ask you about him.
Not only a phenomenal songwriter and an amazing piano player, but an absolutely top vocalist. To me, Billy Joel is our McCartney. I hold him in that regard.
Wow.
He's the closest America has ever come to having a McCartney is Billy Joel. He's that good.
What about Elton John then, if we're going to talk about
Elton.
Piano Man?
He to me was always like Billy Joel light.
Interesting.
His songs, I had a couple. Can You Feel the Love Tonight was good. Your Song was good. Some of his rockier things, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, that whole double album I really liked because it was rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
But I never considered him composition-wise, piano playing-wise, and vocal-wise. He would, to me, and they toured together for years.
Yeah.
He was always, to me, just Billy Joel was the real deal.
Billy was the one who spoke to you.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me see if I got a musician.
If there's anyone left on my list. She didn't last long, and so many of the good ones were cut down early. Amy Winehouse had a quality that I think had she lived might have elevated her to the list.
The latest member of the 27 Club.
Yeah. Who else?
Jimmi Hendrix,
Jim Morrison,
Joplin, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones, Kurt Cobain, and Amy Winehouse.
Wow.
Of that ill-fated 27 Club.
You mentioned in passing earlier Joni Mitchell.
Joni.
She's one of the
greatest in that genre ever.
Yeah.
Ever. Songs, voice, her album covers. She painted them herself. Talk about talent. It's like some people get too much damn talent,
I know.
I remember seeing her at the main point or maybe even the second fret.
That's right. And of course, people like Joni Mitchell, it's like, it's not just that they had the songs and the life that they lived, the boyfriends that they had, the people that she was the muse for so many great artists and they were muses for her.
If you've seen the Laurel Canyon movie, that delves into that completely. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. We're kind of coming to the end of our show. People are hanging in there. I want you to again chime in, write to me at peter@pizzaquest.com. But let's do our if you had a Mount Rushmore, four artists that we would put on in place of the four presidents on Mount Rushmore, who would they be? I think we've got Frank.
Frank is one. Ella is one.
Ella Fitzgerald. Okay.
Like number one.
One we haven't even talked about him other than in passing real quick, but I think he would end up on there is Elvis Presley.
Oh, geez. Well, you're talking rock, though.
Well, he was rock, but he was like, I don't know, as a performer, as somebody who touched people with his songs.
As his impact as a performer throughout the course of his life, I would have to agree. But to me, Elvis goes on the rock and roll list with Mick Jagger and Robert Plant and Jim Morrison.
So we'll create a second mountain to the left for and that'll be our next show when we get you back. Yeah. Okay, so we got Ella, we've got Frank. Do we have room for two more? Bobby Darin. Again, that's one that not everybody would know to put up there because they don't have the connection with him that you do. But trust Peter on this one. Follow up on it. Okay, we got room for one more. Who else would you put up there?
Judy Garland.
Judy Garland.
My last story. The producers wanted to leave the song. What's the song? All of a sudden I went blank. Over the Rainbow. Yeah. They wanted to leave it out of the movie.
Yeah.
Thought it slowed it down. Victor Fleming, the director, said, if you leave the song out of the movie, you need to get a new director.
Good for him.
So, yes. So they left it in, and still to this day, one of the most worldwide and timeless and magnificent performances ever. And an amazing song,
Yes, and everything she did, and something came through her. It wasn't just her voice. Something came through her that touched people in a deep way. And my favorite, I'll share this with the people who are listening. If you haven't seen this, go see it. I think you've seen it, Peter. There's a YouTube video put in the search engine, Judy Garland and Barbara Streisand duet. Happy Days are here again.
Yes.
It's about a 4-minute video. Watch it. It will send chills up and down your spine when the two of them, and it's basically Judy Garland passing the torch to Barbara Streisand.
You took the words out. That's exactly what it was.
And I watch that all the time if I want to have a good cry.
Yes. Though she was on for 1 year on CBS, 1963, black and white, and each one of those shows is worth any concert you've ever been to in your life, because the guests, Jack Jones was a guest, Bobby Darin was a guest. She had Frank and Dean together as guests. YouTube the shows of the Judy Garland show, and you'll sit back and see what talent was like and the talent that was around in 1963.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this walk down memory lane, Peter. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to have to do it again. We got a whole other genre we got to carry and cover. So, but we could, of course, you and I have done this, off camera for hours and hours whenever we get together.
Yes.
And we'll be seeing each other up in Philadelphia again soon. I know that you go back and forth between the South Florida area and Philadelphia. You're kind of like a true snowbird in that regard.
Delray Beach from November through May, and I back in the Philly area from June through October.
So you're coming to us today from Delray Beach, and then you'll be heading up to Philly pretty soon. I think my mom has already got you on the calendar for your next performance at the place where she's staying. Thank you so much. It's been great catching up with you, and also sharing you with all of the people who are watching us and listening to us on Pizza Quest. And we haven't really talked about pizza, but you and I have gone on a few pizza journeys ourselves over time. So we could talk next time. We'll talk about pizza.
Thanks for having me. I love you. I love your family. I can't wait to see your mom. She's going to be 94.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
94.
Yeah.
Let's get her to 100.
Well, she's already convinced that she's 103 right now. She's trying to talk us into believing that she's 103 when we all know that she's only 93. Right. But for some reason she wants to skip to 104. So I think if you keep telling her you're coming back to do another show, she'll hang in there.
I am. I can't wait to get there.
Cool. Thank you all. And thank all of you for joining us on Pizza Quest today. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Peter Scott Ruben. And if you're in Philly, find out where he's performing. If they want to track you down, is there a way they can either
just Google my name? Peter Scott Ruben, Ruben.
Ruben.
Yeah.
And no, we didn't even mention that you've got a son who's also kind of a little bit of a music star in his own right, Jesse Ruben.
Yes.
And so if you want to hear some terrific songs, Jesse's got his own following, and he's got some great videos and music on Spotify.
He did My Dad and Me one better. He's a songwriter.
There you go. Yeah.
He's a songwriter. And
on one of the songs, I think I heard a Peter Scott Ruben guitar solo in the background in one of them.
Yes, you did. I can't remember the name of it right now, but
no, but I remember I heard that riff and I said, that's you playing it. Very good. Thank you all for joining us on Pizza Quest. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye. Pizza Quest with Peter Reinhardt is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.